Shenmue started life sometime in 1994 when Mr. Suzuki went to China to do research for Virtua Fighter. It was there he got the idea of having a story set in China. At this time, Shenmue was to be Virtua Quest, an RPG based in the universe of Virtua Fighter, starring Akira. This was in the days of the Sega Saturn when Virtua Fighter was at the height of its popularity. Development lasted for a little over 2 years when in 1997 it was clear that the Saturn's days were numbered, and the game, then known to the press as Project Berkeley, was reworked for Sega's next system, which was then known as the Katana. Mr. Suzuki has stated that it was a painstaking process working on the notoriously difficult Saturn, but he was pleased with the results, proud of what he and his team were able to get out of the aging system. Much of what was developed during this time was used in the final game. For example, our hero Ryo still bears resemblance to Akira from Virtua Fighter, and though the Shenmue saga was to take place primarily in China, our hero doesn't get there until the second game. So, along with Sonic Adventure and D2, Shenmue was one of the first games developed for the Dreamcast. Shenmue was often used in early tech demos to show the Dreamcast's capabilities, building up hype and interest in Sega's next system. On a side note, Virtua Quest was completely re-envisioned and eventually released in Japan and North America for the PS2 and GameCube to less than enthusiastic reviews. The Dreamcast was Sega's follow-up to the Saturn, which had been a disaster for Sega. Sega was eager to get back into the spotlight and the Dreamcast was their ticket. But video games had progressed immeasurably since they were a relevant force with the Genesis. Games like Metal Gear Solid broke new ground with its advances in story and presentation. Games like Zelda: The Ocarina of Time broke new ground with its massive scope and emphasis on exploration. Sega had some steep competition ahead of them. But Shenmue was poised to push all boundaries, but was understandably a difficult task for Sega, and Shenmue was not ready for launch with the system. The Dreamcast hit the US on 9/9/99, where it was a financial and critical success, but right from the start it was also met with great speculation. The PS2 and the GameCube, which was then known as the Dolphin, were on the horizon. Sega was tearing up sales charts, but things were already starting to look grim. And if that wasn't bad enough, months before Shenmue came out in the US, Microsoft announced that it was throwing its hat in the ring with this thing called the Xbox. If the Dreamcast was going to have any long-term staying power, it would need something big, a game that could sell systems and show the world that Sega could run with Sony's PS2, Nintendo's GameCube, and Microsoft's Xbox. And the game to do it was Shenmue. The hype was crazy, the budget was crazy with a reported $70 million price tag. If there was a game that could save the Dreamcast, or at least keep things afloat until Sonic Adventure 2 shipped the following year, it was Shenmue. But it was not enough for Sega and its dying system. For all its technical and graphical achievements, the game had a very deliberately slow pace. It demanded commitment and lacked broad appeal. Mr. Suzuki had achieved his goal of making a simple yet beautiful and immersive experience, but many found the game to be downright boring. Shenmue was by no means a terrible game, but it was unrealistic to think that it could single-handedly save the system. It sold well, but not well enough to save the Dreamcast. Because of the looming launch of the PS2, the fate of the Dreamcast was sealed, and Shenmue was destined to fail. The writing was on the wall long before Shenmue was released. Another case of wrong place at the wrong time. It's interesting to note that almost exactly a year later, Grand Theft Auto 3 would hit the PS2, becoming a smash-hit blockbuster and single-handedly changing gaming forever. Remember how cool it was in Grand Theft Auto 4 that you could walk into almost any building? Well, 8 years earlier you could go through their closets and kitchen cabinets. But as software sales showed, people were far more interested in gritty mafioso epics, driving across sprawling cities, and less about stories of courage, friendship, rummaging through someone's fridge, and driving a forklift. Video games are business and money talks, but that's not to say that Shenmue was a complete failure. Shenmue 2 came out a year later, representing chapters 3, 4, and 5 of the series. But this version was only released in Europe and in Japan. Americans would have to wait another year and experience it on the Xbox in 2002. And while the Xbox version has slightly better graphics, it's worth tracking down the PAL version because it has the option to play the game with Japanese voices and English subtitles. And it's super easy to play import games on the Dreamcast. However, certain versions of the Xbox came with this really cool DVD, Shenmue the Movie. It actually strung together all the cutscenes of the first game into a surprisingly watchable 90-minute film. Shenmue was not a huge seller, but that isn't to say that it sold poorly, but sales for Shenmue 2 were much worse. By part 2, the series wasn't pulling the numbers to justify its enormous budget, which has pretty much sealed the fate of ever seeing a Shenmue 3. Shenmue was supposed to have 16 chapters, with chapters 1 through 5 being covered in the first 2 games. But that still leaves chapters 6 through 16. Sure, they had to wait for years for fan translations, but Earthbound fans got Mother 3, and Snatcher fans got Police Knots. Splatterhouse fans and Rockin' Out Adventure fans, they're getting their just desserts, but Shenmue fans, they got it worse than anyone. Every year it seems like somebody at Sega accidentally responds to a question about Shenmue 3, and Shenmue fans start understandably going crazy. What's the latest thing? Shenmue hero Ryo appearing as a character in Sega All-Star Racers. A positive sign of things to come or just fan service? Only time will tell. In the meantime, you should probably check out the Yakuza series, which is Sega's answer to GTA. Some could argue it's Shenmue done right, from a commercial standpoint. Well, I think it's time we wrap things up. I still have a ton of papers I need to grade, so this is the Gaming Historian saying, thanks for watching another episode of The Gaming Historian. Thanks. I was grading papers with Shenmue on my desk? Didn't even make any sense.